Missoula. We are one of the co-sponsors of tonight's event. The Northwest Eco Building Guild is also a sponsor for this event. This is part of their annual tour, sustainability tour, and this is our annual sustainability lecture series. We have 3 other sponsors as well: the Missoula Institute of Sustainable Transportation, the Home Resource, a recycled building materials center here in town, and Local Builders, one of our premier environmentally friendly builders in town. All of those organizations have tables out around the outside. Sustainable Business Council's down in the corner, then MIST, Home Resource, and Steve Loken is over here. I guess he's his own table. And then the Northwest Eco Building Guild has information up here. Mark Lakeman, our speaker tonight, also has a table in back of things that you can purchase, some interesting books, t-shirts, etc. from the City Repair Project in Portland. And we encourage you to look around at all of the displays after the presentation. Additionally, after the presentation, the Eco Builders Guild is going to take a short, they don't have a chapter here in Missoula. They are interested in maybe setting one up. So they will be getting a group together to discuss that. The Missoula Institute of Sustainable Transportation, if anybody is interested after you see this lecture in actually doing some work with intersections and roads, Bob Giordano, who is right over here, would be happy to talk with you about that, so you can talk to him afterwards. There are several Sustainable Business Council board members here. If you're interested in finding out more about what we're doing, we'd love to have you come chat with us afterwards. One of the big things we know we're going to do sometime next year or the following spring is we are hoping to do a conference on the new economy of the West. So if anybody's interested in helping us out with that, we'd love to hear from you. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Laura Pullen from the Northwest Eco Building Guild Montana chapter, which is based out of Billings. So Laura, I'm going to let Laura introduce our speaker tonight. Bathrooms, by the way, are just outside if anybody needs them. There is a door prize jar back there. We are giving away tea from Tipu's, who provided us with the food tonight, chai tea, and also a Fungal Boogie CD from Western Montana Mycological. One of the singers, Larry Evans, is sitting up here in front. So we'll do that after the presentation. Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
Hello, my name is Laura Fulton, and the background of the Northwest Eco Building Guild, just quickly, I lived in Seattle after I graduated from college, and this was an organization that was very active in that area. They have chapters all over the Northwest, Boise, Ellensburg, Portland, Eugene, Bellingham, Sandpoint, Spokane. And when I moved back to Billings, I grew up in Malta, Montana, I really missed the dynamic activity that was going around environmentally responsible building. And so what I've been attempting to do in the last few months is start a Montana chapter. And what it is a nonprofit organization that promotes environmentally responsible light commercial and residential building. We're primarily a public education organization. And the Billings field office has been going pretty strong now for a few months. We're going to set up a field office in Bozeman. And if there's any interest, Missoula as well. And like I said, the focus basically is public education and awareness on green building techniques, theories, and hands-on workshops. So with that being said, Mark Lakeman is our speaker tonight. This is the last stop of a whirlwind tour. He's been all over the Northwest in the last week giving this presentation, which I've heard is fabulous. And it surrounds the topic of reclaiming our urban spaces to make them more community-oriented. So I'll let him give you his bio. Enjoy.
Well, first I just want to say thank you to the Northwest Eco Building Guild and to each of the communities that's been hosting me as I've moved around speaking on behalf of the City Repair Project in Portland, and also on behalf of Communitecture, which is a private design firm also in Portland, which is made up of many of the designers, architects, planners, facilitators, and others that are part of City Repair. But before I say anything else, I'd just like to ask you if you could please turn to your neighbors and introduce yourself and say a bit about why you've come tonight. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Okay, so who are you guys? Who are you? I want to know everything about you. We can all talk about you. And what are your...
Why did you come?
Okay. Okay, let's start back into this. We're going to be going through a kind of a roller coaster tonight of history. Going to look at the context, especially of westward expansion, so we can understand a little bit more deeply the ground we're standing on and the patterns that we're inhabiting in this culture. One of the reasons we're doing that is because we really need to understand a bit more about our unsustainability as we're trying to get a grip on what sustainability might consist of. So as I said, I'm speaking on behalf of organizations that are made up of many people, and I just want to say at the outset, although you're going to be seeing a lot of really creative and beautiful things tonight, some of which are downright wild and wonderful and even illegal, I just want to caution you not to associate me too much with these things, because they're really a cumulative effort of a lot of people working together. In fact, I certainly couldn't have done these things by myself. So we are multidisciplinary. We do projects with lots and lots of kinds of people involved. You know, we'll bring a neighborhood together, and in order to help them communicate, people that maybe have lived across the street for a decade but never even said hello, they need a facilitator maybe. So there will be folks that are able to help people communicate that are involved. Of course, the neighbors have lots and lots of ideas. We end up needing artists and architects and planners, urban designers, sociologists, anthropologists, people of every description, especially children and mothers. But the thing is that we come together in this process in which, you know, no one person has the answer, although the architects and planners tend to think that they do. That's partially having to do with their educational process. Or the artist might need to think that they have to have authorship over the work. But actually, when it ends up being a great collaboration, the things that come forward and join into a great summation are certainly greater than, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as we see every single time. One of the things I had to do early in this process was, as a architect, planner, artist person, I needed to learn how to let go of needing to have control and have authorship. And also, I needed to let go of thinking that I always had the answer, although certainly people with training do know a lot about how to integrate a lot of the artistic and technical legalistic concerns. But how this works is pretty simple, although it's hard for people to understand at first. Like my own father keeps saying, so what do you do again? Like he's used, like most of our parents and even ourselves, to saying, well, that person's an architect, or that person's a doctor. They do one thing. And what we're doing in city repair can't really be compartmentalized, and that's the whole point. We're living in a profoundly divided society, and the goal, the aim of city repair is to undivide and to rejoin, to reclaim the commons, to find ourselves there, to join our energies and our visions and transform the landscape profoundly. From the patterns that are frustrating us into patterns that are driven by us, that are manifest by us, that are transformed by us over time, and that reflect our highest vision and knowledge at a local level. So that means that we become a place-based community, as opposed to a community that's fragmented and sort of flying all over the place, with other people making the sort of largest scale decisions that affect the rest of us. And we just keep sort of running around doing work and never having enough time to really even know what's going on. So city repair is about addressing that whole condition, getting a grip on it, and changing it so that we can start inhabiting a world that's more fit for us and our children. So yes, we're multidisciplinary, and our goal is to bring people together in order to solve issues. Some people say that what we're doing must have some kind of description. They attempt to call it ecological urbanism or civic ecology. It's definitely an urban project in many respects, although the concept applies to every different condition of human culture. I mean, one person actually asked last week in Seattle on the radio, so is community for everybody? And I didn't know what to say exactly. Yeah, I guess. So we look to change everything, pretty much, but we also know that we've got to do it all together. As you'll see, some of our first work began with just taking some of the commons of the grid and literally seizing it and illegally and taking it and transforming it. But we ended up solving so many social problems that the city council immediately legalized it, as I'll be showing you in a minute. So we began doing something that we knew was illegal, but we also knew that it would just very quickly become legal because it was something that everyone wanted to do. Everyone wanted to make the streets safer, to slow traffic, to bring people together, to encourage cultural development at the local level. Well, of course it's working. I mean, the last time we needed a big change in this country, a bit over 200 years ago, we pretty much did exactly the same kind of thing. When the British were keeping people apart, were keeping them isolated, unable to communicate in the commons, what did we do? We got outside and we started to take over intersections. But the first thing we did was we had tea parties to talk about it. That's what City Repair does. We have tea parties, a lot of dessert starts coming forward, big potlucks, people start to make friends. In fact, some get married and have children. And along the way, we're taking street intersections, turning them into public squares. People start talking, joining their ideas, and all sorts of other things start happening, as I'll be showing you. So, it's all about a common cause. My role in this whole business is I'm a co-founder, I'm a co-director, which means I'm very actively involved on a daily basis. I'm also a project coordinator because I just can't help but being physically engaged. I've got to be building, even though I'm also working on design projects. I work in both Communitecture and City Repair, but right now I'm just going around telling stories. Sort of every year, after a whole bunch of stories are generated, we just kind of add them to the larger story and go around and tell people about it. The reason this is a good idea is because the whole reason we started City Repair was we were looking for something that wasn't just about Portland, but was about everywhere. Like, where can you do something that matters everywhere? And if you have successes and you can tell other people, it might inspire them, to undertake similar things in their own way in the places where they live. Okay, so what I'm talking about is that our frustrations, I want to point out that our frustrations and our opportunities are much the same in every city, especially west of the Ohio River. Top-down planning has resulted in top-down planning in many different dimensions, not only geographically in terms of the city and its infrastructure, but also of the economy and the political structure, has been decided by a few people, mostly on the East Coast, a long, long time ago. So, if there's a dysfunction in any of that, it affects us all, because those patterns were laid over all of us. In 1785, actually, as part of the National Land Ordinance that I'll talk about more in a minute. So, we think that if we do things within the grid, for instance, and there are other cities where people live in grids, then if they're in isolation too, and we've overcome isolation, maybe they'll be inspired to see that they can also. So that's part of what we're up to. Let's see, we have a lot of strategies, but two of the sort of things we always keep in mind is that we're always having fun. We're always treating people with respect, treating people with dignity, even if they are initially opposed to the projects, like the police or the city council or the Department of Transportation. You always treat them with respect, and eventually everybody kind of comes to an agreement of some kind. So we're always trying to work with people and not against them. One of the things that we've done in City Repair is we've looked at some of the first questions that are asked of students in architecture and planning school, in design school. One of those sort of ancient questions that supposedly is insolvable, the sort of cherished ancient question is, does architecture lead or reflect society? And it's supposed to be impossible to solve. It's kind of both, maybe. But what we've done in City Repair is we've thrown out the whole question because it supposes that society and architecture can be separated in some fashion. And we're saying that it can't. That in order for us to build a sustainable culture, design and society must be rejoined, and society must be designing for itself. Let's see. Another thing that we asked very openly through our work, the implications of our work is, for instance, what good is freedom of assembly without a place to assemble? Especially in the neighborhoods where we live that tend to not even have one single neighborhood public square in almost every single town west of the Ohio River. And that gets back to top-down planning. I want to emphasize at the start that even though I'll be contrasting villages with neighborhoods or cities in this presentation at the beginning, I want to emphasize that I don't think any village is perfect. I certainly am not romanticizing anything having to do with any human culture. That's kind of the fun, though, not to be perfect. And then I also want to say that even though I'll be very critical of the grid, I also want to just emphasize that we constantly try to humanize wherever we are, whether we're put into a grid in which everything is mostly the same. Because of the inherent diversity of our personalities, our backgrounds, our families, our race, our ethnicity, we constantly express that diversity and that variety. So I want to emphasize that. Okay, so can we have the lights off? Okay. Occasionally these things go out of focus. So if somebody could just mind these little knobs up here every now and then, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story. It starts looking at westward expansion and the way that our people came west, running sort of from the East Coast, running toward a sense of new beginnings or possibility. Maybe they were running from some medieval condition in Europe, crossing the ocean, moving west. Maybe they were coming from an indentured servitude condition on the East Coast and finally had become free and were looking for a new chance. So they were looking for, water, open space, abundance, a transcendent quality even, so that when they arrived there, they felt like they belonged. Of course, the dark part of the story is that we're crushing sovereign indigenous cultures as that westward expansion was happening. But nonetheless, it's also part of a dream of looking forward to something that is ancestral. It's cyclical. It's like the search for the promised land that goes on over and over again. Like, gosh, I just can't live in the city anymore. I think I'll try to found an eco-village outside of town or something. Or I'm going to buy a house for my family. It's the same sort of pattern, starting over again, trying to reroute, that underlies really many, many, many of the stories of our people. But the way that we land and the way that we establish settlement patterns is different depending on who is making the decisions. In order to contrast landscapes where people are in participation, working together over time, with landscapes that are really driven mostly by policy making in a specialized process, I'm going to be comparing villages with neighborhoods or cities. Some people, after they look at this, they think, well, that's a very unfair comparison you've got going here, because for one thing, they're all out in the street, and they're not. There's businesses here, and there's not here. There's just houses. But that's what I'm saying. In both cases, this is where people live. But in this case, they tend to live above the shops that they tend to own or work in. Okay, this is actually a hill town in northern Italy, and it serves very well to talk about kind of the prototypical village infrastructure that is cross-cultural on the earth. So people come down at the beginning of the day, in this case, their kids come down and run around getting fruit, vegetables, bread, cheese, what have you, and they kind of bump into each other. They end up growing up together. The people are out there throughout the day into the night, kind of washing like a great tide from one commons, from one piazza through the streets and back. Yes, cars are able to go through there, but they don't tend to mow the people down because they tend to know them. In fact, these people have ancestral roots here that just build upon themselves over time. They tend to remain there. Like, I'm from Siena. I've always been from Siena. And wherever I go in this world, I am a Sienese person. As opposed to, myself from Portland. If I move to Seattle, am I still a Portlander? Where's the cultural connection? In fact, they don't even have a word for building community in the same sense that we do. We talk about building community, We come home at the end of the day after we worked among people we don't tend to get to know. Then we live among people we don't tend to get to know because there isn't this common work. So there's sort of a division there, or a disintegration of the infrastructure of some of the very important aspects of our lives. Here, work and living is kind of existing in a place as if these are organs of the body, of community. That has a lot to do with the fact that they've been talking to each other for a long time. And of course, they start to build community, and they build what's called social capital or social capacity. And that truism, it's who you know, or that you know others, starts to provide benefit for everyone. As opposed to here, where these folks don't really tend to get to know each other. They might know a few of the people's names, but they don't necessarily get together very often, except for maybe a potluck. In fact, none of them on this street, none of the people who live here, or who ever lived here, or who will ever live here, have ever had a say in the essential patterns that sort of establish their relationships in this place. None of them ever said, hey, what fun. Let's make this all the same, from as far west to as far east as you can go, from as far north to as far south as you can go. Every single street in the entire city, as if we're all the same, and every single street in the gridscape of the country. Funny. How did this happen? There's public squares all over the place here. They have about 10 times less crime than the folks over here. It's a really strange thing that this has happened. Some people, say, well, this is just a carscape. It's always laid out like this. But actually, the Roman colonial grid was laid out before cars even existed. So where did this thing come from? And who made these decisions to have these here? Well, every town starts usually around water. As I was saying before, people look for water. For instance, looking at the Great Valley that became Portland, Oregon, there was sort of this constellation of villages, interwoven pathways, intersections, crossroads, where there were altars, sacred places, springs, places of pilgrimage, memory, people that were making love, dying, being born, all of it being remembered for thousands of years. Very quickly, the military arrived. For some reason, after Lewis and Clark had come, most of them were decimated. They had died from diseases. But the military that arrived in this area quickly cut up the landscape. 12 military men of high rank cut up the area and basically gridded it off for sale, to sell to those who would come later. They became the property-based ruling class of the area who held the land, the power, and made most of the decisions. As Portlanders have started to address public space issues and tried to understand the roots of unsustainability, of course they've identified that those founders didn't provide public spaces, except for some park spaces, which do work for recreation and relief, but don't bring people together in the distinctly social sense that a public square does. So people have looked back and thought, well, let's just blame those guys. But actually, it was the National Land Ordinance of 1785. They didn't really have a choice. The essential patterns were mandated from a central place. It's really important to think about all these kinds of things because, after all, we all came from villages. Like, whether you're talking about Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, people of the plains, we would all celebrate our culture at intersections. That was where pathways converged, therefore lives converged, and we made a place for it. Like this village in southern Germany. Like there's something like 12 outdoor gathering places in this village, about the size of a typical Portland neighborhood. Here's one. Pathways lead right into it. Same gig with the Native Americans. Form a big circle, the pathways lead into the center. They call it the Great Living Room, and it emphasizes the common spirit, common life, and it facilitates the daily activity of the people. Looking more deeply at village fabric as opposed to the grid, you can start to see that human beings sort of have an essential a sort of weave that underlies their habitat. But look at the difference between the village and the civic infrastructure of the grid. In this case, let's just look at the block to start with. Notice that the houses, in this case, it's an aerial view of a Dogon village in Mali, one of the most culturally expressive and sustainable cultures in the world, in spite of its climatological challenges. Around the periphery of the block, like a string of pearls, are all the houses with a great indoor meeting house. Sort of at every block scale, there's at least one of these. Notice, especially, that the opening made in the middle of the block. They don't have to come outside and say, hey, let's find some common ground around here. Like, they're literally standing right on it. So at the block scale, they're emphasizing community. At the intersection, it's a place is made for commerce and cultural celebration, interaction on a daily basis, formal and informal occasions. So you can see we have roads and paths, blocks, and intersections that get to be village-scale gathering places, as opposed to this formula, which again, these folks, the folks that live in here really didn't have a say about. By ordinance, it's been established that they will not have that commons, and by ordinance, it's been established that this point will not be a node of connection, but rather, more likely, a place of collision. Okay, this is unfair, but we're gonna compare two intersections here. A lot of you have already been to this place. It's the Piazza del Campo in Siena, and I'm using it because it's sort of the most spectacular example of how an intersection works for bringing a community together. It's the great meadow intersection that connected Pisa, Milan, and Rome up in the hills. A beautiful shell-shaped concave piazza facing the sun. It's sort of a solar piazza. My mom actually has done a lot of research on this, and her work informs this presentation. So each contrada, each section of the city is called a contrada, sort of like a neighborhood, but each of them even has a public square. Each of them gets to have a horse, and the horses race twice around the periphery of the piazza every 6 months. The point's just to get everybody together. The piazza's big enough for the whole village. The winner of the race, the winning horse, the winning contrada, they parade through the streets singing songs about place and culture for 6 months, and then they do it again. And the point's just to get everybody together, a big party. Okay, so that's how that intersection works. This one doesn't get to be a place. You stop, you wait, because you're going somewhere else, and there's kind of this binary signal, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. And that, as I said, does not get to be a place. And I think it's kind of interesting when you notice that both of the dominant institutions here both have arches. But that's where the comparison really ends. Historically speaking, the fact that this is a place, and this is called the Palace of the People, has everything to do with the fact, that this intersection gets to be what it is. And the fact that this is not the Palace of the People has a lot to do, seriously, speaking, looking into colonialism, has everything to do with the rise of corporate culture and the fact that this intersection is not a place. When we look at sustainability and we look at unsustainability, these are the patterns, the most fundamental patterns for the commons that we can compare. Okay, a lot of people ask when we're doing workshops in Portland or other cities, they ask, well, what happened to my village? Like, what happened to it? When were these decisions made? Well, it's an old story. It kind of goes like this. Some villages existing there literally at the intersection of trade routes on water. An aggressive culture comes in, subsumes that place, those people, usually directs their life work toward, sort of profiting the empire, and then a city is built. So cities usually are built on the ruins of villages, historically speaking. Okay, well, we know that's true of the land we're standing on, but one of the things that a man from this area, an indigenous man, told me was that it has happened to us all. He's like, look at your own story. You think you're the only one? You think that we're the only ones that are hurting? He's like, look at yourself. You don't even know your own story. At least we remember who we are. But this is the story. So there was an indigenous meeting house. In this case, you're looking at the foundations of a Celtic meeting house, a circle, just like a Native American teepee. In both cases, they would sit around the periphery and they would see each other's faces. They could interact and participate. The whole idea was having to do with an ethic of wholeness and connection to the larger body of nature. Very quickly, this aggressive culture comes in, smashes the meeting house, usually first, and then builds the new gathering place with the new order or the new sort of paradigm of worldview on top of that broken building, literally using the building to build the new building. Okay, but the problem isn't just that you put the square over the circle. It's that whereas in this geometry people meet in a more egalitarian structure, in the Basilica of the Romans, only one official voice spoke from the official manual of truth, and everyone else just sat in rows listening. And there you see that you go from participation to policy all of a sudden, and it's literally a change of paradigm for the local people. That's our story. To boil it down, Okay, so one of the things that indigenous people remember, pretty universally across history, we pretty much all had this kind of understanding, even though the symbols were different. It was the understanding of the consequence or the value, the importance of the intersection. Just looking at this Native American symbol, for instance, this one happens to be Mayan, but it's much like a North American version. The idea is that you integrate all of your understanding into this simple device. Some people call it spiritual, but you can also say, well, that's just urban design, or that's just timekeeping, or that's just geography. This is how it works. You know, it's saying the cycles of time are one whole, the 4 quarters of the year are one whole, the axis of rotation of the planet and the axis around which we're rotating, you know, sort of both of those axes, by orienting yourself to that, you can find yourself, you can locate yourself. But it's also talking about the ways that the pathways converge at a place, and that's talking about the village heart. This is a very ancient understanding across the planet. It may even be part of a sort of a mother culture. But one of the things to observe about cultures that have this sort of little reminder in whatever way they manifest it is it helps them to remember how community and all of life itself relates to time and space in a process of living and dying and death and rebirth, regeneration. So we can still see that cultures that identify with that kind of understanding are more expressive, certainly more family and community oriented, and definitely tending towards sustainability. Although imperfect, you know. So this idea goes way back even for everyone in this room. Looking at this African watering hole, for instance, this aerial view of the savanna, you can see the pathways of animals and people leading to this source. And then they sort of stomp around. They linger for a while. They don't, actually, usually they don't even tend to attack each other in this place. But the Egyptians, for instance, took this understanding, which became a village-based sort of concept. And eventually, with the rise of cities, they developed this place diagram that was their hieroglyph for city. You know, it's talking about a place. It's saying that the city or the village is where the pathways come together and culture is built. So this goes way back. All right, so talking about villages a little bit. It's hard to find a village around here these days. You know, you might find an apartment complex or a condo development or maybe a student housing project that references this word, but it's a very different thing than an actual village. You know, you'll be driving down the street, you'll see the village, maybe you'll think your grandmother's in there and you'll pull in, but you're probably not going to find her. You know, lately, and that has to do with, again, planning models that we didn't choose, because otherwise we'd probably be in a village. So lately, with the rise of automobile culture and Detroit having way too much to do with planning, especially of road infrastructure, with the Interstate Highway Act and other things, you know, we've now got these other top-down models that come to us. We just kind of figure, oh, this is just happening everywhere. Malls are just everywhere. But actually, it's decided at a sort of federal level that this is the model that they'll promote. All right, but what's important for us here is to realize that those guts of community that used to exist in some kind of balance in a localized fashion in the village, here is removed into a container where somebody else holds the key. They decide when it's open and closed. You can't gather signatures or do public speaking, so you know, so much for the village commons. You know, notice when you go into those places how vital they are, how active they are, how scaled they are, like a village. Very close, you know, streets, very close relationship of the shops across from each other, sort of mimicking the places that we like to go visit, our ancestral places. All right, so until a few decades ago, Portland, like a lot of other towns, maybe even Missoula, this was kind of what you'd have as a vestige of the village. You know, there are nice park spaces where you can go with views and even some amphitheaters, things like that. But by and large, in the urban commons, you know, where we could be socializing, this is the sort of vestige you find. There's a bench facing a hedge, looking at a parking lot. So you come along, maybe you're carrying some groceries, maybe you're 85 years old and you just have to sit down. Sit down here. Maybe you look up at the luggage sign and you think about buying a ticket to go somewhere else. You know, the rise of new urbanism that is kind of sweeping the country, where they're talking about really good things like front porches, walkable communities, places where people will talk to each other. You know, they're kind of reclaiming some of the things that we've lost through modernism and even postmodernism. But, you know, there's this kind of language of planning and architecture that's being appropriated for condominium developments, and they'll even call it a village. So you're driving by, you think, hey, there's a village. But don't be fooled by these balloons. You know, the real estate agent put that out there. What you'll find in there are codes and covenants that dictate, you know, how you relate to each other within this place and whether or not you can even put a flower pot out on your porch. So there ain't no village economy happening there, nor the expressiveness of an actual place-based village culture. They're all just kind of flushing in and out on someone else's clock. Okay. Well, we play this game sometimes here on the left and have fun doing it, but most people don't realize as they're doing this that they're actually playing the National Land Ordinance of 1785. The rules of monopoly are actually a distillation of the National Land Ordinance, and the whole premise that you would take the great commons of America and convert it into a commodity is played out on this. That where the cultural mechanism is missing and the commons is missing as well in any form. For instance, where are the birthdays here? You know, where are the cultural celebrations? Where is the public square? A friend of mine actually has created a Get Out of Hell free card that she's starting to hand around to friends. But it's the same idea. Power is concentrated. The world is treated as a commodity. Eventually, you know, you outcompete other people, and someone ends up owning everything. And that's the definition of capitalism, actually. So you just play that. When we start to look at how we're just kind of going through this process of sometimes unconscious conditioning, it shouldn't surprise us. You know, as we look out over a typical Western American city, all the way to the horizon, you won't find, usually, almost always, not even one single neighborhood public square. That's actually an aerial view of the 96 neighborhoods of Portland. Not one single neighborhood public square. Dozens, even hundreds of people with different ethnicities. Dozens or hundreds of different ethnicities, all coming from village-based cultures. Not one place. Like, what are the Italians doing there without a piazza, for instance? Or the Spanish without a plaza? Okay, so in this light, you know, looking at the fact that in our cities there are thousands of public squares missing per capita. Portland alone is missing between 1,500 and 3,000 outdoor public squares per capita. If you just, depending on which culture you're looking at, that those people come from. So if you look at the whole Western United States, how many more might it be? So it shouldn't surprise us, this whole phenomena of social isolation, that we already know the United States wrestles with more than anybody else in the world. And there's a reason for that. It shouldn't surprise us that we walk by little girls who are just asking to get to tomorrow, to survive till tomorrow, that we don't scoop her up and take her home and make sure that she's safe and warm and find her parents and her relatives. You know, that we walk by each other and we don't even say hello. We're so acclimated to this disassociation. And I think in the process, and I think that this is largely the opinion of others in City Repair and even in this room, that we are consuming the world to try to fill a void that we can only find when we come together, that we can only fill when we come together and find each other once more. We're compensating for a lack of this, perhaps. In the center of everywhere that we live, you know, just like a house has a living room and it has everything basically that you need. Every single scale of community needs all of those parts. You know, this is what urban design is about. I mean, one of the most basic understandings in urban design is that the urban infrastructure is supposed to facilitate communication above everything else, and yet that imperative is not understood by most urban planners. It's mostly about the movement of goods and services. Okay, but you know, what have we lost? In City Repair, we oftentimes have people getting rather upset as they start to take a deeper look at the places that the spaces that they've taken for granted, and they start to look at more deeply what it is that they think that they've lost. And at the same time, some people are saying, no, we haven't lost a thing. It's still inside of us. We're all still villagers. We never gave it up. At least we never wanted to give it up. You know, we've realized that there was never a vote taken that that we would just give up all the neighborhood public squares and give up the authority to politicians and real estate developers to lay out our worlds as if they would, know better than us. So as we think, oh, we've lost these relationships, our old people will just go off to die alone, and our young people will just go off to be educated by people we don't even know, and we'll just go off to do work that maybe we don't really even like. Let's look again, because we can always have this. We just have to decide to. And this is what we can have. That this grandmother, for instance, can can know, when she looks in the eyes of her granddaughter, that her songs and her stories and those of her mother and her mother's mother have been heard, and that this child can learn things that money can't buy and books can't teach. This is what it's about. And not only that it's a place where they all belong, and they treat each other differently because they know not only each other, but the people around them. So that's one vision that I think is what sustainability looks like, no matter what clothes you're wearing or skin color you have, as opposed to this sort of mentality where the grid is asserted. Patterns, ecologies, humanity is removed. Orchards are planted, removed. Cattle are fattened, removed. Housing tracts go in, removed. Mixed use, mid-rise, removed. High-rise. I mean, that's the story of Manhattan. And indeed the story of sprawl that we're all contending with. And the thing that really I think we need to get a grip on concerning this is that in that process, all of the beautiful things that have happened, the memories eventually become dispersed and dissipated and lost. And that is our destiny, unless we stand up right now. Okay, so could you turn and talk to your neighbor and just say where you've come from and a little bit about your cultural roots?
What are your cultural?
Get on a ship and got
Apparently mine seemed very remote, great grandparents.
Okay, can we have the lights down again?
Was,
Sue? Sue? Can we have the lights down again? Thanks. All right, so in City Repair, we like to just realize that revolution happens every day. We're just spinning around out here in the void, going around the sun. People are making choices with every day. Sometimes the process of acceleration or the process of change accelerates and there's a big pop. But it's nice to realize that we're all just kind of working on the process of change every day together. I'm going to tell you a story about Portland, Oregon, as I said before, but I just want to start off by emphasizing in this view, looking over the freeway, that we are dealing with all the same sort of problems and opportunities, therefore, that everyone else is dealing with. But we are known as the most progressive, visionary, large city in the country, but we certainly haven't gotten everything together. And use this little metaphor of the revolt of the ponds to sort of describe why things are going so well in Portland, Oregon. Just like here, things were happening in the 60s and 70s, and really all over the world, where people were standing up and saying, no, we will speak freely. Or as women, we won't just be equal, we'll be unequal. People of color were standing up to march in the streets, and the ecology movement was gaining its feet. Somewhere, probably all over the place, but this is the story in Portland, a light pawn decided to walk across the game board, and a dark pawn walked over to the other side as well. It happened at the same time. Maybe this is sort of a 100th monkey action. They were about to start the game again. The pawns were going to go out and fight each other. They were going to go off the board, and then the tall, oppressive ones with funny hats were going to come at each other and sort of knock each other around. And so the pawns started to talk to each other because of this sort of cultural exchange, if you will. And these little agitators started to say, it's just going to go like last time. We're just going to go at each other, we're all going to die, and then they're going to die, and then the patriarchs are going to broker a deal and play the game over again. That's the grid. And these other pawns were like, what? Change? Change what we're doing? We couldn't do that. Well, okay, so finally, they got together in small groups with facilitators. They started to share their stories. there was a lot of crying, and they were talking about their childhood and things like that, and everyone was kind of commiserating. But then they went back and talked to the people in the back row, and of course at first there was a lot of defensiveness and denial. But then they reconfigured themselves in a little bit of a different arrangement, sort of the circle over the square, if you will. And the idea was, to just start hearing each other and talking. And somebody who had some extra resources decided to share. Some people with great ideas decided to have a lot of energy and contribute it. And eventually, after just a few of these people having enough time to work together, more and more and more did. As opposed to this, of course, where over here, we've seen this happen throughout history. You just shove the oppressors off the board, but then you become them and you do it again. Sort of fall back into the old pattern. So in Portland, we figure sustainability looks like embracing diversity, inclusivity, egalitarianism, perhaps symbolized by the circle, and a lot of forgiveness, hopefully. One of the first things that we did that made us famous throughout the country and even the world was we reclaimed the West Side waterfront and turned it into a continuous, almost mile-long public park for all kinds of things. It's basically a big people's park where there are a lot of celebrations and informal activities, big events, festivals, things like that. And of course that freeway got moved onto the east side, but at least one of the sides was freed up and people had access to the water again, and it started to emphasize a different relationship, a different mentality about the river. Then, without even realizing that this had made us this sort of remarkable place, what? You'd stand up to the Oregon Department of Transportation, oppose them, and then get them on your side? Well, then we went downtown. Inspired by these radical planners. Well, they weren't really radical, they were just a bunch of dads. But they were working inside of the Department of, the Bureau of Planning. It was the day after Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and they were looking back at everything that had been going on, and they remembered the words during lunch. They were sitting around, and they were talking about JFK, and they remembered his call to not just do things, not just ask what the country could do for you, but what you could do for the country. And they took that seriously. They were feeling a lot that day, and they said, well, maybe this town needs a public square. After 150 years, maybe we need at least, one living room for the community. Well, this proposal was created. The mayor was definitely opposed. Lots and lots of energy started to rise from within even the government, the business community, and across the community as a whole. They wanted to take this two-story parking garage and convert it into a public square. There was a lot of opposition. Businesses were saying, no, you got to build a building there where we can charge for the building. We can get some tax money out of that. Other people were saying, no, build a place where people want to come, and then they'll all want to return to downtown again. Well, on a weekend, some people came outside to decide, they decided to really focus public attention on it. And without the mayor understanding what was about to happen, they painted the rooftop of this garage. And they said, this is ours. We're going to have this public square. We're going to turn space into place. And in fact, they created the first public square built in any major American city since 1930, after many of them were closed down by city councils and mayors because they were being used for public gathering, for labor strikes, for protests and things like that. So we managed to build this over the objections of the mayor, and then we threw him out and elected a bar owner who was more of a person, one of us. Okay, so this led to the rejuvenation of the entire downtown. And it also catalyzed an extraordinary series of things that I don't even have time to talk about. But I just want to point out that it led to the rise of cafe culture. Community radio stations came into being. Community TV stations came into being. Food cooperatives, farmers markets, biodiesel stations where you can just pull up and say, fill it with biodiesel. Alternative transportation systems, MAX lines that are still expanding. Urban streetcars that are still expanding. Like youth projects in schools, bioswales, water remediation gardens. All kinds of projects happening in a great collaboration between all segments of the society. And at the largest scale, looking at containing growth, holding sprawl in some kind of logical way, concentrating growth along transportation corridors, trying to get a grip on it on a regional scale. More remarkable things than I can even describe. But somehow, Portland chose a catalytic point to make a very powerful impact. And it's not just that it brings people together by the thousands for celebrations. It's not that it works as an incidental lunchtime gathering place. It's that for the first time we had this symbolic heart that where everyone understood whether they were there or not, they belonged. It inspired people to start undertaking all these initiatives. It was a great success story that we've been building on for 2 decades. Well, building upon all of that momentum and then trying to accelerate the whole process and inspire other cities, the City Repair Project came into being. Some of the people, myself included, are actually the children of the people that helped to make that Pioneer Square project happen in Portland. What we say is that we're about communication, participation in public squares. You know, that makes us thoroughly grounded in the kind of foundational vision and spirit of the American Revolution itself. But at the same time, we're also saying the city is broken by design. We celebrate urbanity and everything that comes from coming together and sharing, especially, you know, in the center of urbanity. But the city itself has a problem, like the civil infrastructure in which we are citizens that are stratified in a sort of hierarchical, compartmentalized infrastructure creates the problems that we experience. And we're always trying to solve, but we can't because it's the nature of the infrastructure that we've inhabited. That was literally a blueprint of the Romans called the civitas. The civitas. So this picture from Earth Day 2001, it's a poster, sort of tells the tale of what we're talking about. We're trying to find a thing that is a common vision that everyone can relate to. And this is what we're saying. You know, there can be a place where we live in a dynamic, intact ecology. It can be sustainable because the people are celebrating a diversity where they propagate, they trade, they create, they procreate, they celebrate, and they find each other in this place, which is the catalyst. One of the things we did early on in city repair is we said, okay, we've got to look at basic patterns of unsustainability. What we do ultimately has to relate to every individual as well as every scale of community. So we just said, okay, let's look at a typical woman, a mother, who gets in a car at the beginning of a day. She's a roofer. She gets in her car and she goes up and gets in a truck. She travels over to Northwest Portland with these other roofers to fix a roof. It comes back at the end of the day. She goes to get food, picks up her shoes, picks up her child, goes to the doctor, comes back. You know, later on she's visiting friends and doing all these other things while everyone else in the city is sort of flying around the infrastructure as well. Right, when we said, all right, that's basic. We know how that works. Lots of pollution, lots of consumption, lots of infrastructure impact, lots of infrastructure just to maintain that. And including, you know, having to have police, having to have fire stations, the whole culture of taking care of things for us in case of emergencies or you know, even governance because we're not in participation with each other. So we looked at this sort of converse relationship and we said, well, this roofer here, this woman, she could be doing work on all the roofs around here instead. And there's doctors, there's all these people with skills and talents, teachers that she could be working with at this local level. But for some reason, they're not interacting. You know, and maybe if they all were interacting, if there was a fire, they could put it out. You know, if they were place-based culture, they could just put it out. If there was a problem, but there would be less problems. But if there were, maybe they wouldn't need to call the police. Before they got there, it'd be taken care of. You know, they'd be working more with their kids, so their kids wouldn't be going as crazy. All that sort of stuff. If they were more of a place-based community. So looking at that, we thought, okay, this probably has a lot to do with common space and availability of meeting places. So we said, all right, let's choose in a typical neighborhood in Portland where people have mostly Western European ancestry. Let's look at their indigenous prototype for meeting house that was taken away a long time ago. This same one might not work to bring them together, but you know, if you look beyond the technology, you see that it was a great womb space. It had the sense of endlessness, an enclosure, embracing. It was definitely about reconnecting with each other and you know, their whole cosmology and the planet. So we built this fantastic meeting house. This is the floor plan of it. It was a womb space. As you can see, there's kind of this spirit of a large child in there. And this is the way it worked. It was about 1,000 square feet. It was very small. It was a very intimate environment. It was made out of 10 rooms that were all appointed, designed and decorated to resonate with a different aspect of the self. For instance, this was the room of love. You'd walk in there, there'd be all these pillows and rugs down low, poems of E.E. Cummings and pictures from Art Nouveau books. And then the best friends stage of honor, and there are all these pictures of people that are friends, holding each other, hugging each other. The room of humility, which was very low and modest. Grandmother's porch, where you would feel this sort of sense of continuity and comfort. The room of freedom, where there was all these musical instruments. The heart, which was a little pavilion, a temple to transformation. The women's fort, also, well, it was called the soul, also known as the women's fort. You'd walk in there and you just feel like building consensus. The room of sisterhood and brotherhood. The geometry, the design of the space, and everything that happened, in, sort of the whole way that it was sculpted was designed to sort of relate to how you might feel that day. But each of the pieces was a distinct and separate tea house that would pop apart and pop back together. And the entire periphery was made out of doors and windows that all opened and closed. The gateway in led to a sort of a basket-like tunnel, as if it was the birth canal itself. So celebratory gate, and then a birth canal coming into the center. The idea was very intentionally to try out this idea and see if people that walked into this space would suddenly feel incredibly comfortable and at home. You know, because the womb is where you were alive before you learned fear and prejudice. So our premise was if these neighborhood residents of Sellwood can just walk in here, they might get the message and be able to sit down and you know, it wasn't just the design of the building, though. It was the fact that nothing was for sale. It was a great neighborhood tea house that ran one night a week. It was called the Moon Day Tea House because it ran every Monday night. And as you can see, it was very humble and modest, very childlike. In fact, it was built for only $65 using doors and windows reclaimed from dumpsters that neighbors brought out of their sort of personal storage behind their garages or what have you. The floors were made out of pallets. But there was a great conifer growing through the floor and out through the roof, a cherry tree, all these flowers and vines, a rhododendron, and it was specifically throwing out this modernist dogma that affects even the building that we're in right now, that said that humanity and nature are separate, and so our buildings have to express that distinction or that separation. We threw that out and we said, whatever, let's just say that we're all one concern, one holistic relation, and build a space that suggests that, and then create an economy of sharing. So neighbors would come in, bring some of the most fabulous blackberry pies or chocolate cakes or what have you to the little kitchen, and it was also serving out chai and bulk tea with infusers. It was all very elegant. The whole point was to be aesthetic, beauty as a very powerful tool, and utterly unprogrammed, no themes, no dogma, just space and sharing. And this is what it looked like. Well, one of the reasons, I'll go back. One of the reasons we created this was this older Native American man named Elk River. He was a Cheyenne. It's about the size of Yoda. He used to walk through our neighborhood. You know, Yoda from Star Wars, that little character. He used to walk through our neighborhood, sort of hobble through, and he'd stop and talk to people at this one intersection. And part of what inspired this tea house was one day he stopped by and he saw some kids kind of playing in a tree. They'd sort of built a little clubhouse around it, and he said, boy, where are your places to meet? How come you don't have any places for your whole family to get together? So it kind of led to stuff like that. But one of the things that he said before he left suddenly was that one of our problems, if we wanted to make the community a better place, was that we needed to stop asking permission all the time to do things that were our birthright. We didn't really know what he meant, but we ended up building, I think we ended up figuring out, because we built this tea house without getting a building permit. And we got in trouble because of it. But one of the things that Elk River said was that sometimes you just got to do something where you just get in trouble. But if you're doing it for a good cause, for everyone's sake, then eventually everyone will start to get along. But you just got to take a chance. So we did. The Building Bureau got involved, and they said we couldn't have it, but because so many neighbors had started to come together here, they backed off. In fact, at first there was only 25 people, then there was 35 people, then there was 75 people, then there was 150, then there was 250, then there was 500. Like every successive Monday, it kept growing and growing. In fact, if you didn't get there early, you wouldn't even get in at all. So you'd have to sit out on the lawn, and then eventually they were sitting on all these lawns around this one intersection where Elk River had kept coming back. But people weren't talking about Elk River. It was really just about this thing that was making everybody feel good. Well, eventually the city government had to back off and let the neighborhood have it. At that point, the largest engineering and architecture firms in the city stood up and told the Bureau of Buildings to back off, like KPFF Engineering, does all these skyscrapers. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, this is the strongest building in the city. It's woven together like a basket in the strongest possible geometry. And so Bureau of Buildings backed off for a while. They said we could have it for 6 months. But the fact that they attacked it really motivated the neighborhood. They started to talk a lot, like, gosh, they're going to take away our tea house? Well, they started to look at the whole fabric of the neighborhood. Here you see the neighborhood historian, Eileen Fitzsimons, explaining colonial history and what led to the creation of the Sellwood neighborhood. They're looking at a little model of the intersection. They've drawn a circle around it here, and they've used some popsicle sticks and clay to show some trellises and benches, and they're showing some ideas about planting trees. And some people are getting fairly upset as they're talking about this, because some of the kids in the neighborhood had just gotten hit by cars crossing to go to a local park. So they were starting to realize, oh my God, 500 houses here, completely surrounded by main streets, not one single place to go for our kids. So they started to learn that the intersection used to be quite a different thing many years ago. Well, it was sort of a depressing atmosphere at first until this 13-year-old woman stood up and said, hey, I've got an idea. How about if we just draw this grid out where we live, look at the intersection we're talking about, and just mark out on these 4 blocks here, just these 4 blocks, what the breadwinners do, and just look at how they'd relate to each other if we were working together. So we gave it to some kids, like we did it on a computer, we gave it to some kids, and then they started to draw lines in between, like they said a contractor, an architect, a carpenter, an ironsmith, an electrician, a plumber, a roofer, a designer, a landscaper, another carpenter could all have something to do with each other. They said, hey, there's a chef, everybody here eats. There's a social worker, there's all these people with problems. There's a doctor and a sick retiree next door, a community worker, and this whole community. So they started to figure out, oh yeah, and then they said, now let's throw in the stay-at-home parents. Let's throw in the kids. And they realized that there were all of these social relationships that could be happening, but again, something was missing. They looked at standing objectives that probably every city has. These were the ones in Portland. To build community by fostering communication, sharing, and collaboration. Provide a gathering space in a neighborhood forum, enhance safety and livability, calm traffic, beautify, provide an adaptable model. We realized that we could do all these things, and we'd already done these things with the tea house, and it didn't require any money from or political leadership. But the thing that enabled us to do it was that we didn't ask permission. We just did it. We didn't wait around for funding. We just did it. So we realized that this list was incomplete. I mean, because for one thing, it didn't say, engender friendships between children and families, bring old and young back together. So we took a look at this whole grid, and we remembered what Elk River had said. One time he came back again, and he saw these kids drawing circles out on the intersections, and parents as well. And he said, wow, circles, that's neat. What a great idea. Well, how come everything around here is so square? Everything's flattened and all the streams have been put underwater. How come there are no bigger circles around here? How come it's so square? Did any of you guys make that decision? And everyone's sitting around thinking, oh, there he goes again. Well, in the workshops, somebody said, probably inspired by Elk River, you know what? If somebody put a square over our circle at some point in our family's history, it's time to put that circle back over the square. So that's what they decided to do. But before they can even get anything done, somebody went outside, I think it was a mom, and she just said, okay, let's start off with a 24-hour chalk station. She got some kids together, they nailed together some branches and a couple of pieces of plywood, built a little shelf, and they put out this little bucket. Suddenly you see these indigenous villagers reclaiming the commons in this revolutionary act. A carpenter gets together with these foster kids that nobody ever paid attention to, in fact, mostly yelled at, and said, I'll work with these kids and we'll build a library. So they took a window, some boards, a post, some plywood, some paint. None of it cost a thing. They had all this stuff. They just got some neighbors to share. And in 2.5 hours, they had this little library. And they put all these books out here because we've all got extra books laying around. And they just set them on the shelves, different philosophies sitting together on the same shelf, like, the Upanishads, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Talmud, all sitting together kind of cozily on the shelf, nobody fighting over anything. But the concept that they had here was, they were looking back at ancient settlement patterns, and they just said, if we don't have a $5 million endowment for this library, maybe we should just start. Like, we'll probably get too many books, and someone will say, well, maybe we should build some more shelves here, and then they'll get out on a Saturday and have a waffle potluck or something, and then they'll, build some more shelves. And the whole idea was, humanity's kind of like this big garden or something. And just like with a garden, you start with a seed or a start in your garden, and you add water and it grows. So more books come along, you just kind of build on it, and that's exactly how we built our places, our villages. Okay, so we called the Department of Transportation. We said, we've got this great idea. We'd like to create a public square in our intersection. And they, we explained the idea, and they said, absolutely not. That's never been done before. And we said, well, so much for the American spirit of innovation. And then they said, and besides, if we even let you have that conversation, if the city council even hears about it, then people will get mad at us. And we said, oh, we're already mad at you. So, so then when they said, besides, that's public space, so nobody can use it. At that point, we knew that we knew more than them. Like you're asking permission from somebody who doesn't know as much as you. How silly is that? So we got together and we decided, okay, well, there's a whole bunch to this story, but we decided to go ahead. Anne Marie, the older Catholic woman on this corner, was just adamant that we would go ahead in spite of the rules. Sort of an aggressive old lady from Brooklyn. It's kind of funny because people look at this neighborhood now after all these things that have happened, and they say, well, that's Selwood. They're a bunch of radicals. But really, there's Anne Marie, there's Brian, the dragster mechanic, there's Steve, the nuclear bomb part maker, and then there's Megan, who had just moved from Idaho, and her family grows potatoes. So just folks, but they'd had this tea house that had brought them together, and they had decided to undertake this whole thing. So on a certain day in September of '96, somebody in the Department of Transportation had granted a closure for the intersection to have a huge block party, and they knew that we were going to paint, but they said, just don't tell anybody who gave you the permit. So we were out there painting. We'd been building for a couple of weeks this family-sized bench, made out of old fence, pieces of an old fence. This tea station, we called it, a place for history, a stage, a little library, this whole sharing area over here, a little art museum, poetry place, and then we were building a clubhouse for kids wrapped around this tree. So we planted all this out there on a certain time the night before, just when it was dark, and then the next day we came out early and we painted. And when Ed, the simply enormous policeman, came down the street and got out of his car, he saw all these people, grandmothers, little kids, whole family standing there smiling at him, holding rollers and brushes. And he just said, I ain't touching this. He got back in his car, he backed away, and he got onto Harney Street and took off. And he said, I'm just going to let transportation deal with this. Well, this goes back to that old villager saying, it's who you know, or that you know somebody. We knew Ed, because Ed had been coming to the tea house. Somebody had complained about the tea house because all of the, the activity in the street. The folks living in condos down across the train tracks were really bothered by the fact that everyone was gathering up here, the pagans rising or what have you. And they called Ed. Ed would show up and he'd see what was going on and he'd join us for the tea party. So, Ed is a great guy, and he's now in charge of the whole Southeast Precinct. The guy in charge of this problem in transportation, the way that he successfully facilitated the community led to him becoming the most powerful transportation official in the city. So we shouldn't be too afraid of taking risks, especially when they're good ones. So we painted the street. But, the reason why it worked, Elk River would be able to tell you all about it, but the reason why it worked is because it's just a version of the barn raising. People coming out, doing stuff together, eating together, dancing together, celebrating, going home and having different dreams and then making new choices the next day with a different view of each other. So let's see. A little while later, different families get together. Somebody's got a steel pipe. Somebody else can sew. Somebody else does mosaic inlay. Somebody else has got a pump thermos. And they created what's called the 24-hour tea station. Probably the world's first and only 24-hour tea station, but it's got this PV panel, feeds a battery system. It glows at night. The neighbors take care of the water. They clean the cups. There's tea bags, and there's usually a honey bear unless the ants carry it off, which apparently they've done. Gardens planted all over the place. Before it was a very nondescript intersection with nothing really distinct happening. A lot of people ask us, what about all the vandalism? What do you do about all that? And we just say, Actually, there's no vandalism that happens. Literally, no vandalism happens here. You know, our strategy was just to get the vandals involved at the very beginning of the process. So you've got 4 boys here from 4 different families, you know, certain to become criminals, except for the fact that we got them involved in this whole process at the very beginning. So they decided the shapes, the colors of the tables and stools. You know, they convinced their parents to go to the beach and collect driftwood, you know, for the material to build their clubhouse. They decided to wrap it around a living tree to fill it with toys and games. They stand on the paint that they lay down, you know, so, you know, they would defend it, except it doesn't get attacked. What happens instead is that they're the coolest kids in the school district, and that other kids want to do the same thing, as I'll show you in a minute. Well, in this case, a contractor gets together with more kids and an artist and builds this cabinet for kids to give away old toys. You know, fancy that, imagine that. And then parents giving away stuff from their gardens and fruit trees. The artist paints the roof to look like a big leaf. It's sort of got a lot of color underneath, but it's a native plant leaf if you look at it from above. Another sproutlet of the village heart. You know, in this case, the village heart, it consists of all of these different functions that, you know, are normally removed to the mall or zoned away from the housing tracts where we live. In this case, we've put them all back in this, you know, beautiful garden of culture. Well, immediately on the north corner, people move into that farmhouse, and some friends of mine actually, and they start to plant this incredible self-regenerating permaculture garden, not just for fruits and vegetables and things like that, but to grow plant starts and cultivate things for their native plant nursery that I'll be showing you in a minute. So the economic mechanism, all the ideas start to sort of jumpstart and collect. Pretty soon you find out that there's some East Indian dancers in your neighborhood, and they come down to the potluck. All these people come out to see them, to hear and dance with them. 24-hour information station for birth notices, death notices, garage sale notices. Recently a little girl died, and it was covered with all of these ribbons and pictures of her life and all these balloons. I realized something more deeply when I saw that there are all of these things that happen that go unmarked in our lives with our neighbors that we don't tend to know. Green bike program, cut flowers to sell in the native plant nursery, dahlias. This is one of the most extraordinary stories that was proof of something really significant. Now, Steve, the nuclear bomb part maker, and Brian here, the dragster mechanic who lives over here, they used to hate each other, okay? One of them, I think it was Steve, brought his huge sound system out one summer and played it so loud that it really pissed off Brian. He's the giant Viking guy, the mechanic. So he brought out his sound system and aimed it at Steve. And then they were trying to drive each other crazy. The police were having to show up, and then they'd put away their systems. The police would leave. They'd bring them back out. They thought they didn't have anything in common. Then, you know, at some point, the intersection process started. They were both involved. Now you see Brian over here mowing Steve's lawn. Something really amazing had happened. And when I think about this story, it causes me to just kind of question how different could our society be, just because of a few simple gestures. And, you know, $250 in paint and a bunch of stuff laying around in our workshops and garages. So here's that beautiful clubhouse, kind of being overgrown by flowers, toys and books and all of these things. The kids just bring them out and leave them there. Sometimes they take them home, but for some reason there's always more than enough. Nobody's regulating or overseeing it. It's just sort of this 24-hour self-service piazza, if you will. One of the tricks to doing all this is that we get people involved in the neighborhoods where they live. So, you know, we get the artists involved, we get the designers involved, we get the people that can build involved, we get the people who can make food involved, and just sort of activate the skills and talents, but right where we live. You know how it is. We all leave our neighborhoods and we go work somewhere else, and you never get to see the evidence of your own labor where you live. And here, this is what is being done. So we get to see how, you know, the sum is, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So this model sort of conjectures how the thing can grow in the near term, as it has been doing. At some point, they wanted to look at the longest range impact of how this could all change. Somebody said, well, you know, why don't we just kind of ask ourselves, because Steve and Brian aren't fighting anymore, what would world peace look like, for instance? You know, like, is it just where George Bush decides to stop bombing other people? I mean, is it an abatement of violence and we get our foreign policy together? Or does world peace actually look like a transformation of our very lives, where we start to work for and with each other rather than for someone we don't even know? Does it look like us in a rejuvenated, transformed, reinterpreted commons where we're mostly walking and biking because we're doing things with each other where we live? You know, flower shops, cafes, information places, markets, solar-powered fountains or what have you. So we were answering the question, yeah, it would kind of look like that. And according to Elk River, this is the kind of stuff that only we can do anyway with our own resources, that we can never do through asking permission, because this is exactly what won't happen. So they were thinking, all right, so the eco-village then rises within the fabric of the grid, you know, where we're capturing the rain, we're receiving the sun, and we're blurring all these boundaries and sharing, working a lot less hard and not having to pay for an infrastructure that does things for us, because it's what we do together. That's the vision, immediately goes into the fabric. Somebody says, well, this grandmother needs help with her water system for a garden. So somebody says, well, I've got these old vegetable oil barrels I've been planning to do something with. Somebody else says, well, I'm a plumber, I'll put it all together. The carpenter builds the structure, and in a day they've built her a rainwater catchment system for the garden. Somebody else just starts attacking his driveway with the sledgehammer. It sort of seems like he's going crazy, but actually what he's doing is he's tearing up some concrete for his natural building foundation, and he's opening up space for another garden. Gardens happening all around the place. And then he goes on to build this natural building in the center of the block that's accessible to everybody. It's a passive solar cob building with hollow walls filled with compressed straw. The floor is earthen. It's saturated with linseed oil and beeswax. You've probably seen some of these, sitting on a bed of pumice. The roof cavity is insulated with wool blankets, socks, and sweaters that the neighborhood has shared. It has a flowering living roof, as you can see, an oculus, a little chimney coming up there. But it's a high-performance cob building. It's sort of a hybrid of wattle and daub, straw, cob, and this is what it looks like inside. It's used as a play space, marriage chapel, guest house, meditation space, teaching space. People sing in there. For me, it's a retreat space. I like to go there and read. So the neighborhood realized that they were onto something. I mean, if you can break the law and then get away with it, that's pretty significant. I forgot to tell you though, yeah, we broke the law, but and transportation tried to, you know, shut the whole thing down. But the city council, the mayor, saw it. In fact, the mayor, as soon as she saw it, she turns and she says, who's giving you a problem with this? She's like, this is in our city? I mean, she saw a picture of it. I was there when she saw the picture, and she's like, who's giving you a problem? And we said, well, it's transportation. They don't really want to, you know, shut it down. And she's like, she turns to Michael, the giant ombudsman, the problem solver, designated problem solver in Portland. She's like, Michael, all the resources of this office are at this neighborhood's disposal. And I mean, did transportation quake? So he calls them up, he shuts down the process, the city council convenes, we do a presentation, we don't even get to finish the presentation. They're like, oh my God, they're meeting all of the livability benchmarks for neighborhoods, and they haven't even needed any money from us. And we didn't even know about it. So PDOT was told from that point forward to always entertain citizen initiatives that were around solutions, and then we moved forward. They legalized the whole process, not only for us, but for every single neighborhood in the entire city to do to an unlimited number of public squares. At that point, the neighborhood decided, okay, we've got to take this everywhere because the big corporate daily is not telling the story, not even a peep. So they decided to create an outreach mechanism to take one piece of the tea house that had only been allowed to exist for a little while, and they built it onto the back of this truck. They called it the Tea Horse. This is a model of it. Brian had an old and broken down Toyota. He said, I'll fix that up. Somebody had some bamboo in their backyard. Somebody else, you know, the permaculturist had some UV resistant greenhouse plastic. They put it all together. People donated Persian rugs and pillows. They turned this thing into a fabulous traveling tea house. And the whole idea was out of the womb or the cocoon of the tea house came this great huge butterfly. And that's kind of what City Repair, that's how we began, and we still do this. You know, unlike most architects and planners that just look at the existing fabric and the existing history, you know, of architecture, in City Repair we employ all of this mythology, all of these associations that people have with nature in order to create places that people truly respond to. So it's kind of a critique. We entered the Tea Horse into the annual architecture competition, awards competition, and it won this high award. They created a new category. And architects were really upset. They're like, my God, that doesn't even have a foundation. How can you call that architecture? And we said, it's carchitecture, you fools. So the T-Horse just travels around and around the city, going from park to park, intersections, neighborhoods, driveways, block parties, wherever. Here it's arrived in Laurelhurst Park, and you can see the candles are glowing. The evening is sort of twilight setting in. Neighbors have come outside to help set it up. It's just really easy to pop together. Posters have been put up, the community radio station is talking, and all these people are coming outside to sit down and say hello in a place where maybe they've never even met before. That's part of the point. Comes back every now and then to facilitate potlucks in the first intersection project. But one of the main things that it does is it travels around and around the city in this huge 6.2-mile loop that sort of goes from south to north and back, and from east to west across the river and back. It travels in this huge loop from event to event to event. At a certain point every year and a half or so, all of those sites get linked up in this overall project that brings together thousands of Portlanders, and it's called Hands Around Portland. So we link together all the four sort of metaphorically divided quadrants of the city. We get people to stand together in public space for 1 minute. People are all standing there with radios listening to the bike messengers that are going around and around the circle. The people that are normally carrying the architectural drawings downtown. Well, they get involved in this, and they've all got cell phones, and they're interviewing people all along the route. And you're hearing from, trailblazers, the mayor, little girls, and they're talking on the radio, and everyone's listening to this big assemblage. And at a certain point at exactly noon, they all link up and they stand together for a minute. This is a really powerful idea, to say, united we stand. This is our commons. It can have a cultural utility, not just be a place of transportation. We can say hello to people we don't know. We can actually touch them. We can come together by the thousands and not consume. There doesn't need to be admission. In this case, the commissioner in charge of transportation, one of the city commissioners or city councilors, is leading everyone in a sort of a big disobedience act, blocking traffic here. Everyone's starting to stand out and block this traffic lane, and he's saying, this is one of the most important things we can do right now. And he didn't even plan on it. He just walks right out there and blocks traffic. Pretty big deal. But none of that even matters compared to this. This is the very root of sort of foundation of sustainability as far as I'm concerned. We can talk about water catchment, we can talk about photovoltaics, but this is it. This little girl, as far as she can see to the left or the right, can see thousands of people being nice to each other, treating each other with respect and dignity, so that when she goes home, she can turn off the TV and know the difference. She can know the difference between the reality she's just glimpsed and what the movies keep telling her about how we treat each other. And that's about the future. That's certainly about sustainability. Well, the national livability movement, as I said before, is all about front porches, walkable communities. Well, this is taking root in Portland, even with homeless kids, where they've said, let's do that T-Horse one better. So they created the T-Pony. This is kids that don't even have a place, that have chosen to create a mobile place. They take it around and around the city, and it's a way of organizing communities, the community of homeless kids, getting them involved in teaching each other and learning from each other, basically skills. These are kids who maybe nobody ever taught how to hold a hammer, to draw a picture, to think and then realize an idea. Maybe people who have been horribly brutalized or abused by their own parents. So it's a sort of a self-healing project. Well, a lot of the projects we do, like the Tea House, was temporary or ephemeral and designed to lead to the intersection. Well, so is the T-Horse and the T-Pony, and this project designed to lead to a huge impact. So we use these temporary projects. These are projects that are ephemeral. They exist and then they suddenly are gone. They're awareness raisers. They bring people together and suddenly they have a relationship, but they've lost the place because the T-Pony's gone. What are they going to do next? One of the ways we employ this strategy is with the Earth Day Village. It's the largest Earth Day celebration in the country. We model this whole sort of village prototype of places, spaces for interacting, functions. But it's unlike an ordinary festival where you just kind of go in and you're just an observer, maybe a passive observer, maybe you dance. No, in the Earth Day Village, you come in and you have to be participating. You have to be engaged in some way because everything that's happening draws you in. At the very center of the Earth Day Village is the Tea Palace, where the T-Horse and the T-Pony are joined together onto these towers with a salmon atop.
Well, once these events happen, people do want to ground themselves and join together and start to transform space into place. And just like we did with Pioneer Square when we seized the rooftop, and just like we did in the first intersection, because the ordinance is available and the City Council is saying, yes, please do this, and the Department of Transportation is enjoying the hell out of this process, people come out and they say, hey, we're the Sunnyside neighborhood. We don't have a piazza. Let's choose the logo of the neighborhood, the sunflower, and lay it down on the street. So they do that in the first cycle. The next cycle, they build stuff on the corners, a solar-powered fountain, a solar-powered kiosk, trellises on all the corners, benches and trellises going down the street, and a whole bunch of more stuff I'll show you in a second. 19th and Washington in the Belmont neighborhood, in the Buckman neighborhood says, well, they're responding to the American Journal of Public Health, which is saying, well, obesity is the second largest cause of death in America. People aren't actively physically engaged. Maybe urban design is part of the problem. So their response was to create a walking maze in the center of the street, to build an herb spiral on one corner, a solar-powered kiosk over here, and some benches. 8th and Ankeny, day laborers from Guatemala and Mexico working together with local businesses, chalking out their paint design on the street. Then they're dancing and celebrating during lunchtime, building things on the corners. The first intersection I showed you remains involved, developing over time, changing their paint scheme as they're getting ready to put it down in stone and brick. The brick patterns actually lay down with kitchen sponges on the ends of sticks dipped into paint pans. So they're testing their ideas before they finally build it as a three-dimensional traffic calming piazza. North Portland, low income, more diverse neighborhood. 3 successive intersections all linked together with different colors, same concept with dots. This whole project fits together as something called Public Place Master Plan 2005, where we have a plan to do this in every single one of the 96 neighborhoods of Portland. But that's timid. Like when we're thinking about what sustainability looks like, we have to think big, even as we're doing small actions every day. Look at how timid this is, for instance. This geography of one neighborhood with about the same population and area as Siena has only one outdoor public gathering place, as opposed to Siena with 38 and 10 times less crime. So we're thinking this city is missing something like 1,500 or more of these places, maybe thousands. So this is just a start. This is only a diagram to get us going. In fact, what's happening is like in the Sunnyside neighborhood, there's 15 things now. In Northwest, there's nothing. Southwest, there's 1. Northeast Portland, there's like 12. Okay, so we work in a lot of different capacities all at once. We are engaging the community with a multiplicity of strategies. I'm showing this kind of chronological ascension of things as they're getting bigger and bigger to even town scales. I'll show you in a minute. But one of our most successful projects is called Dignity Village, where we're working with homeless people, talking about a sense of place. Here's a guy who can't even stay on his cardboard. We're talking about people that are destitute. Whatever their story is, they're in deep despair. They're having troubles. Maybe they're missing some parts of themselves. And this is a story about some of them who decided to stand up together. Whenever I see this picture, I'm always reminded of Joseph Campbell, the great cultural mythologist, comparative mythologist. He used to say, the society works in reverse. Because of colonialism, our relationship to each other in time and space has been turned inside out. Of course it results in false leadership. The absolute worst people to be our leaders end up in charge, like driving a car backwards or something. He said, in fact, our great leaders, many of them are people with transcendent visions. In our village-based cultures, they would have been our shaman, the people who are seeing so much they can't really engage in the culture to even support themselves. They can't trade their time and space for money, for instance. So, he said our great leaders are oftentimes the people that live in the streets, and we vilify them, we stigmatize them, we don't even know who they are, and they don't either, because they need us to help them to be who they are. Whether that's true or not, watch this story. So because the anti-camping ordinance was overturned, it was found to be unconstitutional because it was criminalizing people for being homeless. People started to camp together. A lot of them women. And if you're not sure whether or not you would support this idea, just consider what it's like for a woman to be alone at night on the streets of an urban center. Okay? Just think about that and decide whether or not you would support this. In this place, they're safe. Took a lot of time, but eventually they won political support. All these allies stood forward to help them, including an anthropologist. When this whole thing went in front of the city council, the anthropologist said, please please legalize this. Please support them, because if you do, you'll get to watch sort of a recreation of human culture itself. They'll be resourceful, they'll use whatever they have at hand, they'll have lots and lots of problems and even fight with each other, but just watch what they're able to create if you let them self-govern and you let them combine their vision. So from tents they go to these rudimentary structures, cobbled together out of whatever they could find. They start to develop gardens, and perhaps this is a sacred cow, I don't know quite what it is. It's fiberglass cow. Little passive solar building put together with absolutely no budget for this couple, by themselves. The whole thing, generated from within, by themselves. This visionary document was prepared, City Repair is supporting the project throughout, along, as I said, with a lot of other entities. But they presented this to the City Council, and they said, the villagers said, we know that you can't even get people together for a potluck to undertake voluntary simplicity classes. But here you have this whole population of people who are saying, we're ready to go. One of the commissioners was saying, we've got to undertake these global warming strategies, to somehow address that. And the village said, we will be your place-based community. Just give us access to some space. We'll catch the water. We'll receive the light. We'll build a kind of autonomous, self-sustaining community. We'll merge a vision of social and ecological sustainability into a place where we live. Portlanders will be able to come in and be inspired what we're doing. And the city council's just sitting there going, right, homeless people. So they gave them some space, Department of Transportation working with them, and they got serious. The first thing that they did was they built this fabulous meeting house made out of trash. It's a passive solar building. It's a fusion of the diversity of the building, of the village. There are Italians there, of course. There's people of all these different persuasions, Spanish. There's Native Americans. And so they said, let's make this kind of like a teepee. Let's make the roof like a teepee. Let's make the walls like a kiva. Let's make the pathway apertures like a piazza. Somebody from Washington said, that dome in Olympia? Well, the whole dome, the whole language of architecture of the dome was taken from indigenous people. Let's take that back and call it the Dome of Democracy. So the whole thing houses the entire village for meetings and gatherings and when it's cold and raining. As you can see, it's just an expression of creativity and adversity. That 2x4 is exactly as long as it was when it got to the village. Almost nothing is longer than 6 feet, so they've got all these wonky, wobbling trusses, but it all fits together into this tight building that is heated by the sun. These are facing south. Glorious thing. They had 12 long 2x4s, and they split them into 2x2s, and they created what they call the 12-pointed inflected radial star truss that spans over the Dome of Democracy. And as I was saying about the tea horse, that sort of butterfly tea house, these folks are thinking mythologically. Talking about sort of Joseph Campbell used to say, people keep talking about waiting for the king, waiting for King Arthur, waiting for someone to show up to save everybody. Well, here they've got this round table, and they're saying, we're kind of like the meek rising up. We're kind of like the return of the knights here to have this big vision to help the rest of society. I know this sounds sort of silly, but watch. Now they've got this world's first solar-powered self-service fire station with a living roof. Water catchment system off of this gutter goes into a rain barrel. They dip it out with buckets. It's got a fire axe, fire extinguishers and Band-Aids in the medicine cabinet, all costing nothing, just resourcefulness and built by the villagers. But the thing to understand here is that they are the fire department, they're the police, they're the government, they take care of each other, they're the family. Here's where they've just built, these are 2 of 7 prototypes, residential prototypes, passive solar residential prototypes, water catchment systems. They've just finished as part of a big project they do with City Repair every year called the Village Building Convergence. Because of all the in-kind donations and the fact that they build it themselves, the total economic sort of cost here, dollar-wise, is only $200 per pop. You can see the plaster's just drying here. This man has built it himself with help from skilled labor, teachers, people that could show him how. This couple has built this house for themselves. This is the first straw bale built in the city of Portland. It's a passive solar building. They're training Kiwis up onto this trellis. This tower supports the wind turbine that powers the electric system for the Dome of Democracy and the main gathering space. So you know, if it seems kind of like a stretch that homeless people would have a vision that extends to other people, just consider this. A lot of them are veterans, and they really believe seriously in that ethic of serving their country, even if, you know, as with some of them, they're missing limbs or they're missing parts of their minds. A lot of the people there, you might think, are broken, but once they start taking care of each other, they find a way to contribute. They all care about the rest of the world, unlike the rest of the world, and how it feels about homeless people by and large. One of the biggest projects that we do, as I said, we're doing tons of things all over the place. If anybody tries to stop an intersection, many more happen. If people have a problem with city repair in terms of intersections, there's the homeless village. So we're creating a culture of agreement and widespread understanding of the need to take space and make place. So during the Village Building Convergence, which is a project that happens every May, and you're totally invited to come participate in, because it's like a big conference of people that come from across the country and even the world to work with neighbors to learn about ecological design and construction. We build these clusters of places. A lot of the work that we do involves, of course, straw bale, straw clay, photovoltaic systems. Everything's a little demonstration project, but not just about technology. It's totally about social sustainability. These places are created by people for themselves. A lot of times we invite classes of school kids in, you know, and unlike most natural building workshops that happen in a rural setting, by bringing it into the city, you can involve people that may not have even heard of it. So we bring kids by the hundreds into this process, and they start to learn about Cobb or other things. Here the neighbors are raising this fabulous metal trellis that spans from somebody's front yard over the sidewalk, over the corner of this intersection, and it's supported on the grass strip. You can just get a permit for this at PDOT. There's at the Department of Transportation. Here's another thing you can get from transportation right off the shelf. Just walk right in and ask for it. This is a solar-powered Cobb kiosk with a living roof, glows with a beautiful amber light at night. Costs about probably $450, including the PV system, and you have to build it yourself. Another one. The whole idea is, you know, you're used to this kind of media. How about a place for some local information? This one's joined with the idea of a library, some little niches for candles and sacred spaces, sacred objects rather. This is a case where someone has decided to give up a portion of their front yard. Like it's happening in the right-of-way. People are blurring the boundary, giving up private space. In this case, a young man, Matt Shekel, was run over by a huge truck that went through this stop sign. The woman who owned this house came outside and held Matt as he was dying, his last minutes of life. He had been crushed by this truck. And she somehow, you know, that old villager thing, you know somebody, you start to care. So all these bicyclists would come by. They had locked his bike up to the stop sign. They were leaving flowers. His mother would come there and sit on the curb. They would leave mementos. And she just said, why don't you just take my corner? Why don't you just take my corner and build a monument to Matt? And so somehow or other it all combined like this. She said, take apart my retaining wall, make a love seat. There's nowhere to sit around here. And so people got involved. They had all these conversations. They decided to build this pillar of Cobb that would glow through these tricycle wheels with mosaic, you know, stained glass, would glow at night, powered by the sun. So the neighbors come outside and they rotate this bicycle wheel on these forks. They orient the PV panel to where the sun is, and it sends the juice up into the Cobb pillar, and then it glows through the night. Of course, it's got a living roof, all mosaic glass here. People leaving all this stuff here like a shrine in Mexico by the side of the road or something. His mother painted this on a bicycle wheel. It rotates, and it's called the wheel of his life, the wheel of Matt's life. So what's cool about this is a number of things. It's all about sustainability, all about celebration and creativity, but it's a sort of paradigm change. The ideas here no scale, if you really start to think about it. Like, wow, a person has given up private space for public good. That changes things. A monument that celebrates life has been created to a real person, you know, not just sort of a big, you know, sort of bronze sculpture to a dead president that you've never met. Like, here's a real person being memorialized in space, blurring the boundaries and changing behavior and thought. Just down the street from the giant sunflower is the Poetry Plaza, where this woman, Lisa, has built this in her front yard. It includes this take a poem, make a poem mailbox where people write poems and leave them, and other people take them, and it's just this exchange box. The ground and the rocks are, the ground is littered with rocks and tiles written on by school kids from up the street, little poems that they've composed. This glows at night. Of course, it has a living roof as well, and it's made of cob. All these cob features are saturated with linseed oil, so they're all weather. They just stand out there being rained on or snowed upon, and they go throughout the seasons. In this case, another case of people giving up their front yard for their neighborhood to use. This older couple loved roses and tobacco. They used to propagate both of these kinds of plants, and so they've installed this thematic cob bench in their front space. They are both they're both alter-abled, and they're not able to do the work, so their neighbors built it for them. In every one of these cases with benches, everyone had to get over the fear that someone might sit on the bench. Someone might sit there. A homeless person might sit there. But actually, you start to see homeless people coming by and helping. In my neighborhood, this guy came by collecting cans, and he came back later and gave people soda and some of us beer. Here's another case of this kind of behavior, crazy behavior, where somebody's created this cob bench that's set into their hill. I know you're going to think there's technical issues with this. There'll be transmission of moisture, but not in this design. There's a lot of research and development happening with respect to natural building and ecological design in the city. This is a cob-faced retaining wall with some of those same challenges, but all those technical challenges have been worked out with certain kinds of draining systems and such. So this always reminds me, though, that one time this Department of Transportation official said in a public meeting, okay, what do I do when people say to me, this, like there are these detractors that stand up and say, yeah, but it looks like a bunch of hippies did it. And what somebody said was, well, what would you say if somebody said it looked like a bunch of blacks did it? Or a bunch of women did it, or a bunch of kids did it? Like, you just don't defend against that, because that's sort of like the Romans vilifying the pagans. That's kind of funny, isn't it? The connection between villager and villain linguistically. How'd that happen? Kind of like how the grid happened. But anyway, the real answer to his question is the fact that all these people are involved, and as soon as the architects and developers aren't in charge, things stop looking like boxes. They get a lot more curvaceous and emotional, sculptural, especially if the kids are involved. Suddenly you've got this public artist who works with glass and somebody who's got glass sitting around in their basement, all these people with different ideas, combining into this lovely form that then they take care of. Another solar-powered kiosk, daycare kids having this idea to build the dragon from the Never-Ending Story as a bench. Another exposed cob bench. Day laborers from Guatemala again getting together, this time with a bicycle cooperative, creating perhaps the world's first solar-powered shrine to the Virgin of Guadalupe here. And then over here, this it's a kiosk for just people in the bicycle community, places to sit. Like all these businesses, especially the co-op, wanted to see them have a place to sit because they're always just kind of standing around waiting for jobs. So they decided to start off the beginning of this plaza. They're about to rip up the asphalt probably this coming May, but what they did at first was they decided to catch rainwater from this scupper and catch it here in this funnel. It goes over and feeds waters the herbs and vines and vegetables there. They're going to continue to face it with mosaic and do something more with the asphalt. Kids in North Portland, Somalian and Ethiopian refugee teenagers in an urban food system project where they're doing some entrepreneurial work. They're giving stuff away to the rest of the housing project, but they're also selling it for project money, for community work. And they've built this really beautiful gathering space out of natural roundwood. They peeled all the logs. They learned about construction. We were helping them to imagine this and then bringing in people to help them build it. Well, when you get kids involved, you have all sorts of really wonderful things that emerge that you just can't possibly imagine in advance. Like in this neighborhood, at the beginning of the season, they had a potluck and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do in the coming cycle. And one of the kids says, hey, why don't we just make a place for the local paper, the Selwood Bee? So, they're not really limited in their imagination. So they're thinking, well, let's just make it shaped like a beehive with these large cob bees on there and then this copper stinger at the top. And it's the most popular place in the neighborhood to get the Selwood Bee. I mean, people are just drawn to it, and we're always having to refill it. And the Selwood Bee publisher's all happy. So here's another thing you can get this from PDOT now. You can just go in and order one. And you can also get this. They won't build it, you got to build it, but they'll just permit it. It doesn't cost almost anything. You just have to watch out where it's located with respect to utilities and tree roots. But this is called the Flame Bench. Comes in a variety of colors. In this case, they've decided to match to the house behind and put on this roof that sort of echoes the architecture behind. So sometimes the objects are sort of one-off. Sometimes they relate to the architecture around them. Sometimes they relate more to the trees around them, but they also relate to history. Like here, I think this is the most beautiful Cobb object in Portland, perhaps the universe. And this is where Lynn, this sculptress, has decided to work with the kids in her neighborhood and build this bench that honors a Native American woman who used to live in this neighborhood. It's burnished, so it's very, very smooth, and it sheds water easily. They also put beeswax on it. Here's where two of her neighbors, these doctors, have decided that it would be very therapeutic for the neighborhood to have a frog-shaped Cobb pizza oven in their front yard. So they share that. That's on private land, but they're sharing it. When they close down their intersection, there's all these big tables out with all these condiments, and they're rolling out dough, and the kids are running around baking pizzas. World peace through pizza. So here's where the Parks Bureau and the Department of Transportation have decided to give up some authority to locals, where 2 pieces of parkland divided by a street, the neighbors have designed and built these planter boxes with benches for herbs and flowers, and then they're locating out in the street with the help of transportation these cob-faced planter boxes for growing more flowers, but also for connecting these 2 parts of the park visually and keeping cars from parking there before they tear it up and either do something different, but certainly something more permeable. All kinds of little meeting house prototypes we've done. This is a little load-bearing straw bale, first one in the city. All these ecological constructors, designers wanted to be doing this work, but there was no example in the city yet. So they said, well, we just need to have a place to show people. And that was done like 3 years ago, I think. And now these projects are happening in the city. My own office is doing, Communitecture is doing 3 straw bales right now. There are also projects happening outside of the city in the immediate area. But of course, the health benefits, the beauty, the incredible beauty of these places speak for themselves, but we just need some to show people. This is City Repair's Cobb Sauna. Might be one of the first ones in the region. We tore down an old garage, or rather we tore down 2 walls, and we left the other 2 walls that were in the corner of the site. You can see here, it's a wood-framed building on 2 sides, infilled with straw clay, using all recycled material like cedar for the inside, and then this beautiful curving cob wall that connects it all together, where we've rebuilt we've built the roof using the 2 walls that we tore down, so nothing was wasted, but you can get about 25 people in there. The New Day School, another passive solar Cobb sanctuary. This one's for a preschool where we actually got the kids involved in the design, so there's a lot of interesting, beautiful things happening. They created all these stained glass windows, a lot of round wood, sort of a sacred space, a play space for the kids. As you can see, there's a bottle wall here. It's kind of a sacred maze that leads into it with little piazzas along the way. Well, all of that activity, like this, I'm going to show you these things here because they've grown out of all of that activity. I'm now doing like the most wonderful kind of architectural design for a living that I never aspired to be able to do before. I'd quit large architecture firms because of toxic waste cover-up conspiracies and things like that involving the biggest architects and contractors in the state. I was working for them and I walked away. I thought, I'm not going to do it like that anymore. My parents were saying, well, but you gotta work all the time and make money. That's the first thing you got to think about. Well, as a result of really just going after the things that I really cared about, like the other people in City Repair, just really following our hearts, suddenly we've contributed to this revolutionizing of how things are done in Portland, architecturally, planning, construction, even socially. Like here's a project that's under construction right now, this 2,500 square foot straw bale. This is breaking down ground in 3 days, this 40,000 square foot recycled material facility that takes stuff that's going to the dump, filters it, and then sends it back to the public for sale. Old sinks, 2x4s, all these building materials. I see that we're definitely running out of time. I've got to go faster. Long span steel, but entirely wrapped in recycled materials with all these old windows and a 30-foot high curvaceous cob cave for the commercial entrance. This is the native plant nursery, but it's built in a historic district. Living roof, massive cistern systems for watering the plants once they get there. This is part of this huge project of these prototypes for how you treat rainwater runoff, but it's built out of recycled materials using raw oak trees for columns that were knocked down to make a local school, to make room for a local school. These huge scissor trusses that we milled from blow down in the area. This project on both sides for the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Northern California that studies Earth consciousness. This is actually a conference facility where they're attempting to link people that are meditating together to the source of consciousness itself. Straw bale building, passive solar, huge living roof, sort of a spiral design. When they're done with that kind of work, then they come out and play with this infinity-shaped pathway, ponds, tea houses. It's sort of a recirculating system run by the sun, but then they're cob and straw bale pleasure spas with hot tubs and things like that. So this is part of a visioning process that we did for them that we're handing now to William McDonough to finish. This is for Bay City, Oregon. A bunch of kids. There's a little colonial town on the coast. A bunch of kids were found sniffing glue. A lot of people started to talk. They decided to re-examine the whole history of the town and share stories they'd all kept secret before. They invited City Repair to help them facilitate that conversation, and what their conversation led to was a vision for themselves that the community needed to develop itself in order to create sustainable economic development. And that would be reflected in the emergence of places, gateways from Highway 101 into the town, intersection interventions, a new sort of walking infrastructure, a village square, a community center, a rejuvenated jetty, reclaiming the bay from the siltification processes of clear cutting, all of these different things, rejuvenating the edge, creating places, linkages, identifying and preserving the archaeological sites and a place for those kids. Here's the astoundingly ecological public square with all of these things going on inside. A reclaimed Masonic lodge, taking the street space and making a forecourt piazza that links it to the center. Community center for the kids and the elders of the community. There's just a lot to say about this whole vision, this vision for a whole community. This reclaimed jetty is part of restoring the bay, as I said, but these are cooperatives out here that have to do with fisheries and tourism, but where the community is running it together. An interpretive center, even sacred spaces out at the end, places for connection between people. And then a place for those kids who'd been getting yelled at for skateboarding or biking in the wrong places. You know, maybe there was a connection that turned them to sniffing glue or something, but now there's a place for all of that activity and more, including a little meeting house for them. Okay, this is the last project I'll show you. This one's really surprising. The fact that this isn't colored is because it's on the boards right now. Tillamook, Oregon, one of the strongholds of the Ku Klux Klan until a couple of decades ago. Something has changed dramatically in this town. And for some reasons, some important reasons, they want to rejoin the community with the heart of the city. They want to head off sprawl. They want to reinvest in the urban center. And now they're doing these curb extensions with natural themes, inlaid mosaic on the corners, fountains, benches, new lighting. They're tearing off sheet metal off of these old buildings, restoring the cornices, practicing this whole ethic of historic preservation. And they're doing 3 consecutive intersection repairs all along 2nd Street as the first main gesture that they're doing. So big transformation, big rejoining, big sort of effort to get it together. One of the things that makes this all work, that makes City Repair just kind of go and go and go, is that we don't just focus on budgets and money. We say, okay, sustainable economics is 3 things: social capital, natural, and economic capital. Focus on the social, build the social. It unlocks the natural, and it gets the economic flowing, and the whole thing starts spinning like a great wheel. That village building convergence project, we just did 12 projects, like 5 public squares. The rest of them were buildings and interventions. The total budget was $35,000 because of all the in-kind, all the sharing, and all the building that was done by people for a common cause. So it's about seeing abundance. You know, we're taught to see that we're alone. We're taught to think that, you know, there's all this scarcity, but in fact, we're being surrounded constantly by possibility. Well, all this work is leading to something bigger than just building stuff and organizing people. We're organizing people in their neighborhoods. Each one of those neighborhoods already has a neighborhood association. There's 96 of them. There's 7 coalitions where they all come together and join. But there's no connection to the city council. And the conversation that's happening across the city now is at the intersection level where they connect to the neighborhood association like I did. They connect then to the coalition like I did. I sit on the board of directors of my coalition. Now we're going to link those coalitions directly to the city council. So people rise through deeds from here to here to here to here, you know, with most of the power retained at the local level and tax money and authority over ourselves. Okay, so the whole reason for that is, you know, we're talking about needing campaign finance reform. This is what democracy looks like. You rise through deeds. People put you where you go because of the relationships you've built with them. I know that seems like a stretch, but you should see Portland's green map of all the sustainable projects. But just this alone is what City Repair has been up to in the last few years. All these different things going on that represent bringing people together. So it isn't a pipe dream. It's well underway. And it's being replicated up and down the East Coast and throughout the Midwest and in places up and down the West Coast, the Midwest. In fact, Seattle's Department of Transportation sent a memo out to neighborhoods about 6 days ago saying, we're ready. So, last few slides now. This is what we're being told that we have to do. You know, to head off growth, we've got to densify. We've got to build these row houses and give up yards. We've got to have smaller footprints, live lighter on the land, because the cities, you know, are great hope. That's what we're being told. Well, we do think living in a concentrated fashion where we're doing a lot of sharing in an urban condition is our great hope. But notice, this model doesn't add a commensurate amount of public space, nor does it seek to involve people in any greater capacity in decisions that affect their own lives. In fact, just concentrating people in this fashion only compounds our problems, as we know from large cities where problems are compounding. As opposed to that is this other vision, which is ancestral and always seems to work, and that is that we find ourselves again together and start to work together, beginning with the commons. So I'm just going to end with a beautiful quote from Elk River. You might call it spiritual, but I just think it's urban design. He came back to the neighborhood one more time. We haven't seen him since, but we don't know how many communities he used to travel through. But he came back one more time, and he saw that we had painted a great circle on the street. He became so excited. He was agitated. He was sort of even distressed looking. And he said, "You've done it. You've put a circle down. You've put a circle down over the square." He said, "All right, things are going to start changing so fast you won't know what to do." And he sat there thinking. He said, No, it's been made so simple that we can all understand what to do. Okay, so just remember this." And he was speaking to all these neighbors. He said, "Okay, water's sacred. Remember that. And so is the earth. And so are people. When they love each other, that's sacred. Community is sacred. Whenever a community stands up together and has a vision for itself, all communities must respect that." He said, "You know, you're part of a greater whole. You know that now." But he said, "You've been taught something throughout your life that isn't true, and that is that you're alone and that you're all separate from each other." He said, "In fact, there's a great truth that I want to tell you now, that if you don't remember anything else, this will help you know what to do." He said, "The one great life you're a part of has never died. It never dies. Each generation makes a place for the next generation that comes as part of that one great life." And he said, if you know that you are that one that has never died, and you try to act in the service of that, then you always know what to do. And then he said, well, in the last few decades, you've finally woken up. Your community has finally realized that it's not the only community in the world. Where all those communities, all the species, all the indigenous people need your people to stand up now and find yourself in a place where time and space is not for sale, where we await you, in a place where you have never really left, in the Tree of Life itself. So on behalf of City Repair, thanks very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity to go around and tell this story.